It's been 3 long years since Eon Productions brought Daniel Craig's iteration of the world's preeminent fictional super spy, James Bond, to a close with the stunning conclusion of his 5th and final Bond film, No Time to Die, finally killing the iconic spy by the only means possible: shooting him, poisoning him, and then blowing him up with a ballistic airstrike for good measure. I believe we can only characterize that as a megadeath. Since then, the Bond franchise has essentially lied dormant, with little news in regards to the next entry in the franchise, let alone who will succeed Craig in the role, though Jacob Elordi, Callum Turner, and Craven the Hunter have all been rumored. To make matters worse, aside from some non-Ian Fleming penned novels and a deeply disappointing reality show on Prime Video, 007 Road to a Million, a series that was just a boring version of The Amazing Race that featured notorious curmudgeon Brian Cox as a Bond-esque antagonist in pre-recorded segments where he pretended to challenge the contestants, there hasn't been any major Bond-related supporting material. Which is why Bond fans the world over geek so hard at the release of a trailer for what appeared to be a new LEGO game starring Ian Fleming's greatest creation. The trailer in question features genuinely hilarious recreations of some of the spy franchise's greatest moments. The Man with a Golden Gun's infamous corkscrew jump with a hapless fisherman in tow, Bond's iconic opening gun barrel falling on a pig in a top hat before course-correcting to a banana-wielding James Bond, and what appears to be the Donald Pleasance iteration of Blofeld stroking a chicken rather than his famous cat. The trailer promises what would have surely been a LEGO Star Wars The Skywalker Saga level celebration of the greatest and longest running action franchise in cinematic history. Unfortunately, the leaked trailer turned out to be nothing more than an abandoned pitch from British game developer Traveller's Tales. Sources conflict on whether the pitch was for a LEGO Dimensions expansion pack or a standalone game, but they agree that the pitch was most likely denied due to the mature tone of the James Bond franchise. You know, all the sex,
We'll fix that.
murder,
I think you got the point.
and general misogyny.
Man talk.
Ignoring the fact that that reasoning doesn't make much sense considering LEGO has partnered with several franchises that could be deemed too mature for its target audience. They've made several Batman tie-in games, and the last cinematic entry in that franchise begins with a man in a gimp mask bludgeoning a mayoral candidate to death with a carpet tool. LEGO's decision to not move forward with the game seems to be part of a disturbing practice that's hitting the Bond franchise particularly hard. While the act of censorship is nothing new, the way it's been applied to Bond recently has been somewhat disturbing. Not only was the LEGO game cancelled, but the one game we've actually managed to get, 007 Cypher, is an oddly sanitized experience. Cypher, a mobile game I only heard about because of Calvin Dyson's YouTube channel, features an inane framing device that finds James Bond trapped in some sort of spectered dream machine, giving the developers behind the game a poor excuse to design levels around Bond's classic adventures. Levels that are explored by a generic Bond character model who puts his enemies to sleep with a trank gun rather than putting them to sleep permanently with his iconic Walther PPK. Unfortunately, it would seem that the days of blowing your best friend's face off with a watch-operated mine are far behind us. It's an odd decision that I imagine only makes the game less fun and actively undermines the ruthless nature of the character. I mean, we're talking about a guy who has no problem with throwing a man out of a helicopter before banging his widow the very next day. He doesn't put his enemies to sleep. If this censorship began and ended with an obscure mobile game, I wouldn't have a problem, but this decision mirrors a far more problematic move from Ian Fleming's own estate. Back in early 2023, in celebration of the anniversary of the release of Ian Fleming's first and best Bond novel, Casino Royale, Ian Fleming Publications reissued the author's entire Bond catalog. Rather than a simple update with brand new covers and additional essays, Fleming's estate commissioned a review of the original texts,
the sacred Jedi text,
by quote-unquote sensitivity readers. According to the disclaimer that precedes each book, the intention of the revision was to remove offensive terms and attitudes that were commonplace at the time so the books could be enjoyed by a modern audience. Right about now is where I normally provide examples of how the books were edited, but considering this is 2024 and the odds of getting cancelled for even a scholarly look at the writings of a white British nepo baby from the 1950s and 60s are extremely high, I'll simply encourage you to check it out for yourself. While I respect the impulse behind editing the novels, after all, as a Bond fan I want everyone to feel welcome in the world of James Bond, a franchise that's thrilled me since I first saw Tomorrow Never Dies when I was 10 years old. Anytime art is altered from the original artist's intention without the input of the original artist, I get a little uneasy. It would be one thing if these newer editions were offered as an alternative to the original books, but considering that the original texts weren't reissued alongside them, it's more likely that the new versions of the books will serve as their replacements. Considering that we live in a world that's already moved on from physical media, it'll only become harder to find physical versions of the original books, while the digital versions, even the ones you potentially already own, will simply be updated. Because the truth is, we don't actually own any entertainment we purchase digitally. This puts Fleming's original work in jeopardy of being lost to time, and more worryingly, threatens to scrub away the problematic aspects of James Bond himself that are essential to the character. Unlike his grittier contemporaries, Jason Bourne or any of the protagonists from John le Carré's work, those guys have no fun. Bond lives a lavish lifestyle, traveling to exotic locations, sleeping with beautiful women, eating the best food, and drinking the finest Vespers. But despite those wish fulfillment aspects, the character of Bond is a fallible one and shouldn't truly be emulated. Right off the bat is the fact that he's a murderer, one who, according to Fleming, enjoys inflicting as much damage as possible to the people that he feels deserve it. Then there's the fact that he's an alcoholic, one who apparently can down several martinis, then turn around and perform heavy cardio in a fuel-powered hotel in the middle of the desert the very next day. Then, most problematic is the fact that he's a womanizer, one who usually ends up getting the women he beds killed. Jesus. While these aspects of Bond are inherently negative, they're the complications that make the character what he is. James Bond wouldn't be James Bond without them, but we run the risk of losing those aspects by altering the original texts.
The sacred Jedi text!
What's even worse is the potential of rewriting history itself. Ian Fleming was born in 1908 and died in 1964. His father was a member of British Parliament who had a stake in the Robert Fleming and Company Merchant Bank. He was a very wealthy, very white, very British man. Of course he was a racist, a sexist, and a homophobe, one who took particular issue with lesbianism, a concept he no doubt considered to be a disease, probably because it meant less women for him to have affairs with. As a result, his work was a product of those thoughts and beliefs. Should these aspects of the man be celebrated or repeated? Absolutely not. But they also shouldn't be forgotten or sanitized. They should be contextualized for fans of the series who want to experience the author's work as intended. Despite the censorship of Bond media outside of the films, the silver lining is that the movies themselves have handled the problematic aspects of James Bond in a far superior fashion, evolving with the changing times without losing the essence of the character. Bond still murders when called for, but he does it without making his feelings about Korean people known. Bond still infiltrates villainous organizations, but he does it without going undercover as a racist caricature. Jesus. He still drinks like a fish, but we no longer see him puff on cigarettes. He of course continues to bed beautiful women, but he generally does it without threatening their employment to blackmail them into sex.
Don't mean... Oh, no.
Oh, yeah.
And during the height of the AIDS crisis, he even became semi-monogamous, though that went out the window the second Pierce Brosnan stepped into the role. My man was the lover, not a fighter. To sum up, despite his faults, James Bond is quite simply the greatest cinematic creation of all time. A problematic character who came from problematic origins. A character who, rather than being censored, should be allowed to continue to change, evolve, grow, and most importantly, take narrative risks. Like the aforementioned decision to kill him at the end of No Time to Die. Yes, this dissertation about censorship was nothing more than a thinly veiled excuse to defend the conclusion of that film. It was brilliant. You can calm down, Bond nerds. He's gonna get rebooted anyway. It says so at the end of the credits. Let me know what you think about James Bond and the threats and benefits of censorship down in the comment section below. Like me, do you think it's a troubling sign, or do you think the franchise desperately needs it? Let me know. I'd also like to ask that if you liked this video, please click the like button, press subscribe, ring the bell, and share it with a friend. I'd like to say thanks in advance. Thanks for watching, and until next time, peace.